The Indian military says 3 suspected militants were killed in a gunfight with government forces in Indian-controlled Kashmir today. It's the first reported gun battle between Indian troops and militants in the region since last month's massacre, which left 26 tourists dead and which India blamed on Pakistan. Islamabad denies the charge. Earlier, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi said his forces had only paused military action against Pakistan. He was speaking in a televised address for the first time since a weekend ceasefire ended 4 days of cross-border attacks between India and Pakistan.
A calm, but not without some uneasiness. The fragile ceasefire between Pakistan and India that was brokered with the help of the US during the weekend appears to be holding for now. In Pakistan's capital, Islamabad, locals expressed their relief at a stop in the fighting.
At first, we were afraid that something bad might happen to us, but the Pakistani army did a very good job and assured us that we didn't need to be afraid. So with the Pakistani army, we have nothing to fear.
But in the disputed region of Kashmir, residents were left to inspect the damage. More than 60 people were killed in 4 days of intense conflict last week.
Just 2 days ago, there was shelling here, and my aunt was martyred. India talks about a ceasefire, but we don't believe it. India is deceitful. Whatever agreements they make, they don't honor them in Kashmir.
As a result, tens of thousands of people from each side of the border have been displaced. Most of them are from the Indian-administered part of Kashmir. Many say they are still waiting to see if the ceasefire will hold.
I want to go home, but I'm not confident yet. Anything can happen still. We saved our lives with great difficulty.
In India, Prime Minister Narendra Modi gave a first televised address since the fresh clashes erupted between the two countries. He hinted at India only pausing its military operations but remaining on high alert.
We have just called off our retaliatory operations against Pakistan's terrorist and military bases. In the coming days, we will measure every step that Pakistan takes based on the attitude it adopts.
On Monday, Indian and Pakistani military officials engaged in talks to discuss extending the current ceasefire. For now, locals stay in wait of more good news and a more stable cessation of hostilities.
OK, so let's see how things stand between these two countries. We're joined by Chietigj Bajpaee, who is a senior research fellow for South Asia at Chatham House. Joins us from London. Welcome to DW. Let's start with today's claim by India that it killed 3 militants in Indian-administered Kashmir. How is that likely to affect the current ceasefire?
So clearly the situation remains precarious. We've seen reports of continued skirmishes along the line of control, as we just heard. The punitive actions that were taken by both countries before their military response, that also remains in place. And this notably includes the suspension of the Indus Water Treaty. The Indian side has said that it would consider another terror attack as an act of war. The ceasefire that's been put in place, it doesn't really address any of the underlying grievances in the bilateral relationship. The rules of engagement have clearly shifted towards both countries adopting a more assertive posture. So frankly, in this context, it's not a question of if, but when tensions rise again.
OK, so do you expect a response to these Indian killings, or do we see this as being a sort of unexpected blip along a road to a more difficult discussion?
Yeah, frankly, I think it's very much an expected blip. Relations remain precarious. Both sides have claimed a victory from their respective viewpoints. So, yeah, I don't think that I'm not frankly very optimistic about a lasting peace coming out of this current ceasefire agreement.
The military leaders from the two countries are talking. Has anything substantial come out of those talks?
So yes, Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has stated that both sides have agreed to start talks on a broad set of issues at a neutral site. As you said, the military leaders, the DGMOs, the Director General of Military Operations, have both spoken to each other several times. But it's frankly unclear whether this will pave the way for substantive peace talks. You know, the Indian side have said that they will only discuss the issues of terrorism and the issue of Pakistan-administered Kashmir. The Pakistani side wants to focus on the resumption of the Indus Water Treaty, which remains in abeyance, and the status of Indian-administered Kashmir. I mean, the last time both countries had substantive peace talks was what was referred to as the composite dialogue process, which went on for a decade before it came to a grinding halt following the Mumbai terrorist attacks, which took place in 2008. So I think India has said, of course, that it would consider another terror attack an act of war. Pakistan has said the same with respect to the suspension of the Indus Water Treaty. So there's a very real, I think, prospect of renewed hostilities in this climate.
OK, so they can't agree what talks should be about, but we have America apparently applying pressure. But India, with this long-standing rejection of international mediation, just look into that strange mix of events and just talk us through what you think might come out of it.
So I think India and Pakistan have somewhat differing positions from the statements that are made by the Trump administration. I think the Pakistani side has said that several countries were involved in facilitating this ceasefire, including the United Kingdom, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia. On the Indian side, I think they've downplayed the role of third parties, and I think that reflects the proclivity by New Delhi to view the Kashmir issue as an internal issue or a bilateral issue. But clearly, I think the U.S. has to some degree demonstrated its role as mediator once again, albeit a somewhat reluctant role. You know, initially we saw statements by Vice President J.D. Vance that it was the India-Pakistan issue was fundamentally none of our business. Trump had talked about that the India and Pakistan would resolve this issue, one way or the other, and they've then changed their position in recent days. I think it also demonstrates a degree of economic leverage that the U.S. has over both countries. India is in the process of negotiating a bilateral trade agreement with the U.S. And the day before the ceasefire went into effect, the next tranche of a IMF loan was approved for Pakistan, a $7 billion loan. This is the 25th IMF bailout that Pakistan is facing. So I think in some ways the U.S. role echoes the role it played during previous periods of tension, most notably the Kargil conflict in 1999, when the then Clinton administration played a prominent role. But I think it is also a source of frustration to India, this tendency to draw some sort of false equivalency between both countries' actions. I mean, India was responding to a terror attack which took place in which 26 civilians were killed, and then its initial response was to hit terrorist infrastructure, not military installations. And Pakistan has then responded with a broader range of attacks targeting both civilian and military infrastructure. So this rehyphenation of the relationship between India and Pakistan, I think, is a source of frustration to New Delhi.
Quick word then about the United States' position in this, because as you say, they've gone from this is none of our business to let's see if we can help you sort it out. Was that because the conflict was just becoming too dangerous? And if that's the case, is that how this is going to end, with it just bubbling away until it explodes every so often?
Well, I think it partially reflects, Trump's worldview. I think he claims that he had stopped a nuclear conflict. I think it reflects his desire to be seen as a peacemaker, in some ways echoing, again, the U.S. actions that we've seen in other flashpoints in Ukraine and in Gaza. His preference to focus on the use of economic warfare, as we've seen with these retaliatory or tariffs that he's imposed on several countries over military warfare. So I think to that degree, I think if we see conflict passing a particular threshold, in this case, if it's heading towards indications of a potential nuclear conflict, I think the U.S. and other countries are eager, would be more willing to play a more hands-on role in trying to de-escalate tensions between both countries.
That's very clear. Thank you for talking us through that. Chietigj Bajpaee from Chatham House. Thank you so much.
And let's get more from DW's Delhi Bureau Chief Sandra Petersmann. Sandra, what is the latest on the ceasefire? Is it still holding?
It appears to be holding, Biresh, though I want to point out that according to India's army last night, unidentified drones were spotted and then Indian forces dealt with them. This is perhaps also indicating that nerves are still raw, but by and large, like I said, it seems to be holding. Prior to Mr. Modi's address to the nation last night, indeed, there was a phone call between the two directors of military operations from India and Pakistan. This was very much part of the original ceasefire agreement, which took effect on Saturday afternoon, 5 p.m. local times. And we have learned from sources that in this call, the Indian Director General of Military Operations pointed out that if only a single shot is fired, action will be taken. And he also made pretty clear that India views this ceasefire as something that is under permanent review. It's a ceasefire on probation. And it was discussed in this call, so we have learned that if it holds, then we could potentially look at a reduction of forces along the international border and the line of control that is dividing Kashmir between India and Pakistan.
Speaking of the temporary nature of things, Modi, in his address to the nation, said that the country was only pausing its military actions, leaving open when it chooses to retaliate. How do we interpret that?
I think, Biresh, we need to keep in mind that this address to the nation was designed as a victory speech, as a speech that also needed to address hyper-nationalist elements here in India. And indeed, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi did emphasize that striking deep inside Pakistan, deeper than ever before in the last decades, will be the new normal if Pakistan continues to engage in cross-border terrorism, which of course is an allegation that Pakistan denies. And we should perhaps not forget here what else is happening. Trade remains to be suspended. The border remains shut. The very crucial Indus Water Treaty remains suspended. So people-to-people relationships literally have come to a halt. And if I may quote Narendra Modi here, the Prime Minister, he said last night, terror and talks cannot go together, terror and trade cannot go together, water and blood cannot flow together. All of this has to be seen as part of India's plan to really isolate Pakistan.
And speaking of people there, tens of thousands of people have fled their homes due to last week's violence. Is there some form of help being provided to them?
There are shelters in the affected villages along the line of control. Many, of course, also stay with friends and relatives away from the line of control. What will really be crucial is the long-term help, as people need to rebuild their shattered lives, their shattered homes. A lot of them, we have to keep in mind, are deeply traumatized after these 4 days of intense violence with drones and missiles, Biresh.
We'll leave it there for the moment. DW's Sandra Petersmann in Delhi. Thanks so much for that.
Right, let's speak now to Farah Jan, a senior lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania, who's focusing on international security issues. Great to have you on DW News. So, Narendra Modi said India had only paused its military action against Pakistan. So, is a military escalation between the two countries likely?
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss such an important issue. I'd say it's important to keep in mind, important to recognize that Modi's tough rhetoric at the moment is largely aimed at his domestic audience. Modi is delivering on the nationalist image that helped him win the election last year. I'd argue that this domestic political calculation kind of creates its own escalation risk. And Modi built his political brand on a strong stance against Pakistan. And he may feel compelled to follow through on threats to maintain credibility domestically. Now, with that said, I'd say, yes, I would say escalation remains a as it remains possible, as Prime Minister Modi stated in his address today. And he also, as you pointed out, has stated that India is only taking a pause on military action against Pakistan. It is also watching and monitoring every step of Pakistan. What is particularly concerning for me and for most scholars working on this is that the recent conflict kind of marked the first drone war between two nuclear-armed states. And that gets us quite concerned.
Absolutely. Well, India accuses Pakistan of harbouring terrorists, which Pakistan denies. What's your take on this?
So this accusation has been a long-standing part of India-Pakistan tension. This is not the first time. There's truth to the fact that militant groups have historically operated from Pakistani soil, sometimes with state tolerance. Now, with that said, my understanding is that the situation today is way more complex than what it used to be, with Pakistan also being a victim of terrorism internally. We cannot forget what recently happened with the train attack in Balochistan. The real challenge is that these accusations, what they do is fuel a tit-for-tat cycle, making diplomatic resolutions harder for these two states. What is really needed is an independent investigation, enhanced intelligence sharing between these two states. And even within this particular state, after the terrorist attack in April, Pakistan did push for an independent investigation, an option that India rejected.
Unfortunately, we are almost at the end of the show, so we're going to have to leave it there. But it's been great to speak to you, Farah Jan, Senior Lecturer at the University of Pennsylvania. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me.